Hey, how are you? I'm Greg Hensley with Stone Edge Surfaces, and today we're going to talk a little bit about going over wood substrate horizontal floors with our Stone Edge stamp mix. Things that you'll need to look at is making sure that the structure is sound that you're going to be going over, whether it's an interior floor or a wooden deck. And say it's a wooden deck, you want to make sure that your wooden slats are not at least a 1/4 inch apart. If so, you'll probably want to get some 1/4 inch sheathing, plywood, and put another layer on top of that to shore it up and making it more rigid for your top coat stamp mix that you're going to be applying. So sometimes when you're looking at an interior floor, you want to walk that surface area to make sure that basically it's pretty rigid and you don't hear a lot of creaking and deflection. And if so, if they have a crawl space, you may want to go up underneath, see if there's availability of shoring that up with a turnbuckle stanchion or something of that magnitude to be able to make sure you have a nice rigid surface for your material to go over, because I don't care what type of concrete it is, the concrete on top, the top layered stamp mix, is only as good as the substrate you're putting it upon. If there's too much deflection over time, it could incur a minimal hairline crack. So we want to make sure we get it as rigid as possible. Upon all of that, we're going to be putting a waterproofing system, a vapor barrier per se, and then we're also going to be using a lathing system. We are per se going to be using SpiderLath, where you could use a metal lath if that was something that you had in your area and the SpiderLath was not available. But I do suggest going and looking at SpiderLath, being a lot more user-friendly and easier to work with your hands. But today we're going to be using SpiderLath over this wood substrate surface. Our first step, of course, we've walked it. Now we have a rigid surface. We have our good plywood surface. And so the next step we're going to do is put down a vapor barrier so that when we apply our stamp mix from the Stone Edge material, it doesn't get the material sucked out at a great rate so that it becomes a little more brittle, which could also entail a hairline crack. We want that material to cure out at a nice slow rate to get all of its qualities out of that material over longevity of time. So the first step that we're going to do is we would take our plastic wrap or Tyvek paper or felt paper, some type of vapor barrier, and we would cut enough to fill the entire room of whatever facility or house that we're doing, and making sure that we have enough to cover prior to application. Make sure you get all of your tools and materials cut and prepared before you do your substrate surface. So we just have this small piece of plywood here today. We're going to take a sheet of vapor barrier. We're going to just staple that down quickly. And again, I don't have to staple that down every 2 inches. I'm going to staple it down about every 8 to 10 inches. Hey, this is Greg Hensley again with Stone Edge Surfaces. I'm here with Cody and David from Rochester Airport Foundations, and today they're kind of assist me in applying our vapor barrier and our lathing system so that we can apply our underlayment material over top of our wood substrate flooring. So we're going to grab our plastic, and the reason that we're putting this on there is we're using this as a vapor barrier. I could use Tyvek material, but the main reason I'm doing this is because I don't want all of the moisture to be taken out of the product due to the wood sucking that moisture out, causing the material to be a little bit more brittle as it cures out. So that is the main reason for using Tyvek paper, for using a moisture barrier over wood substrates, is so you don't get all that moisture taken out at a rapid rate, which can weaken your concrete system that you're trying to apply. So we put the vapor barrier down. Now we're just going to staple that thing in a couple different places. So we have our vapor barrier down now on our plywood decking system or interior floor. And now we're going to pick up our SpiderLath and place that on top. And you want to make sure that you have all of the pieces to cover the entire floor area cut twice. So if you have 200 square feet, you're going to want to cut 400 square feet of spider lathing system so that you can put one layer at the bottom and then one layer at the top of your mix once you apply it. And you'll cut those in about 4 foot by 4 foot pieces so that you can handle them easily. And as you're placing them down into the concrete, on the second layer, you'll overlap them and place them directly in the surface and trowel them in. But for the first layer, you can just roll it all along the floor. You can screw it down, making sure that you do overlap 2 to 3 inches from each edge, okay, at the surface area, and make sure that it's completely sound to the substrate area before applying your mix. So now we're going to apply the screws, our lathing screws, into the lathing system into the plywood. You could use roofing nails, you could use commercial grade staples. You just need to make sure that you get your SpiderLath attached to the flooring system. Now what you don't want to do is you don't want to attach it every 2 to 3 inches. We're creating a floating floor, guys. And what we're doing is we're doing about every 8 to 10 inches with our screws so that we give it room for movement. That's why we don't primer upon the actual lathing system upon plywoods, because we don't want it completely attached to the wood. We want it to be able to float and move separately from the expansion and contraction of the rate of wood due to normal temperature differentiations from night, day, from seasons, or whatever it may be. But now we're going to start to apply our lathing system. So if you're applying your lathing system over your vapor barrier and plywood, and you incur a small bubble like this, you want to make sure that for the most part you get that out by backing out your screws and tightening up that particular area, because you don't want there to be a large enough bubble to where your material would sit directly off of the floor. So do try to make sure that you get all of your materials tight down to the surface area. Now that we've already applied our SpiderLath over our vapor barrier, over our plywood decking system, whether it's interior or exterior, you could have also used your normal mainstream metal lathing system. The difference with this is all of the edges are very sharp to work with, and as you notice, the SpiderLath comes in a roll, so it bends very easily to be able to contour around edges, around steps, around things that you may be wanting to put mix upon. The difference is the SpiderLath will come back to its formation a lot of times, so that it's easy to apply. Once you bend metal lath, it is stuck in that position until you forcibly bend it back, and a lot of times it's hard to get perfectly back into that configuration. So just being said, I have nothing against metal lath, other than the fact that it's harder to work with. It's more time consuming in application, where in SpiderLath you can just roll out, you can apply easily, you have a very high tensile strength and strength of overall shear of the material, same with the metal lath. So you're welcome to use both systems. This is just the preference for stone edge surfaces for using our material over a wood substrate deck or interior floor situation. Hey, it's Greg Hensley with Stone Edge Surfaces, and we've already attached our lathing system to our wood subfloor, and now we're going to mix up the product to create our underlayment, which is almost kind of like a rubberized cement underlayment, be similar to someone using a Schutler-Dietrich system or a thin set for tile. We're just going to be creating a concrete substrate by which then we can come and apply our stamp mix for our aesthetically pleasing depiction that we've desired for our design of flagstone, texture, whatever it may be. But first we have to have an underlayment system that we've put over our lath with another layer of lathing system troweled right into the surface of that. So now we're going to mix up our bags of Stone Edge Surfaces gray stamp mix. we're going to be adding 12 ounces, because we're going to use 3 bags, of Primer 110 dry. Let me tell you a little bit about Stone Edge Surfaces Primer 110. We have 2 bonding agents, a Primer 100 and a Primer 110. The Primer 100 is just an EVA resin, liquid bonding adhesive. Our Primer 110 is a superior dry polymer that we use to mix with water, so that when it's traveling, when we're shipping it across the country, or internationally for that matter, that we don't have to worry about freeze thaw problems, things of that magnitude, and then when the contractor gets it, they can actually mix their own water to it to be able to create their own bonding adhesive a little bit at a time, depending on how large their job may be. And normally, as you remember, you do take your Primer 110 and you add 1:1 water to powder volume to create your adhesive polymer Primer 110 for rolling onto your concrete substrates to apply your stamp mix. But as we're doing our underlayment, we're just going to add 4 ounces per bag. We're going to do 3. We're going to go ahead and do 12 ounces total for these 3 bags. If I had already mixed up my Primer 110 from Stone Edge Surfaces, it is a mix ratio of 1:1 water to powder volume. So if I had already had some solution mixed up, I would use 8 ounces per bag. Four ounces of dry mix per bag, 8 ounces of post mix per bag for creating your underlayment mix lathing system for overwood substrate. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding my mixes and get them wet and mix them up for approximately 3 minutes. I can add a small amount of polymer firsthand, adding all of the quarts of water that I need for 2 bags of material. And then I'll begin to add my first bag. So when you're mixing up your underlayment material with your stamp mix and your Primer 110 powder or post mix involved with it, even though you may try to be looking for a lower, thicker viscosity level, okay, to be able to screed, we still want to make sure we have it thin enough that we can get it screedable underneath our screed rake. So if you put your Primer 110 in your bags and you still feel that it's a little thick or whatnot, don't be afraid to put an extra cup or pint of water to make sure that you can get a screedable surface for your actual material. So you are making sure that you get a nice frosty-like consistency for your underlayment configuration of stamp mix and Primer 110 together, so that it'll screed nicely underneath your screed rake, okay? Also, make sure that when you get to the viscosity level you're looking for, please continue to mix for about 1.5 to 2 minutes to make sure you get that full 3 minutes of mixing, to make sure that all the components are really meshed together for what you're trying to accomplish as an underlayment. So I want to talk a little bit about the tools that we're going to use when we're applying the top layer of SpiderLath into the layer of material that we're getting ready to screed on our wood substrate. Once we mix up our material and put it out, we're going to use a gauge rake, guys. And we're going to put our material down. We're going to gauge it a certain thickness. I have that set at 3/8 of an inch. Do a minimum 1/4 inch on wood substrates. I personally like to do 3/8 most of the time. Then once you put that on there, you can quickly, it doesn't have to be pretty because you're going to be troweling your SpiderLath directly into the surface. You can just kind of hit it with a smoother. Just to kind of get all your gauge lines out. Then you can apply your SpiderLath and trowel that in using either a concrete trowel, plasterer's trowel, or a pool trowel. My preferred preference is a pool trowel because when you're troweling on top of the SpiderLath system, the corners of this actual concrete trowel, passage trowel, can catch some of those squared honeycomb areas and pull and drag them SpiderLath right out of the surface. So using a pull trowel really helps you work it in, and you'll see when we're doing this, all we're trying to do is work it into the surface area, keeping a glaze of the actual cementitious material over top of the surface so that we don't see any of the white of the SpiderLath. Once you have it buried into just the surface area, you can back off and move on to the other area. So now we've got our stone edge stamp mix and primer 110 mixed up together to create our underlayment over our wood substrate with SpiderLath. I'm going to dump some material out, save a little bit, come off the end, we use the screed rake, come as close as I can to the corner. And then I'm going to have you jump and follow me down each direction as we go. I'll have you follow me down this way, David. I'm going to come right down the side. Dragging along the leg. Before we go any further, let's have Cody down your way now. Come back. Time is money, so we're trying to get it out pretty fast. Now, if you're an interior or a floor, you'd definitely be working much faster than this, right? Because you wouldn't have the guys having to stand over the edge or anything like that. You'd be able to just put it out. So, now that we're towards the end, just kind of let it come off the edge. Boom. We'll pick that up in a second. Now, I'm just going along the middle, making sure that I have the excess material. So now that I've put my underlayment down, I'm just using my smoother trowel just to kind of flatten out the surface so that it's just a little easier to put my meshing system down into. One more pass. On the edge here. So now as you're doing from section to section, putting your bags out of your stamp mix with your primer 110 or primer 100 configuration, now is the time, once you've smoothed it up just enough. You don't have to smooth it off for stamping, you're just trying to close up your gauge rakes. Now it's time to apply your secondary layer of sandwiched SpiderLath into the surface of this particular mix. So I'm gonna grab this, go right down, just kind of use your fingers to push it down in a little bit, create a slurry, and then just grab a pull trowel and start troweling it right into the surface here. You'll notice as you're troweling the material, it'll seem a little stickier than it would without the actual primer 110, and that's because we're trying to create that surface area. So now we're going to put our second layer of SpiderLath next to another layer, okay? And I should say that this is the topical layer, but the first layer that you put down directly on the vapor barrier, the plywood, you could have just rolled out large pieces, stapled or screwed down. These we need to cut about every 4 feet so that it's easy for a man to be able to lay down, trowel in as he's putting the material down and not have too much reach out. So as you can see, once we've laid our topical layer of SpiderLath down into the actual underlayment mix, we're troweling it directly in, and where each piece interacts with each other, you want to make sure the overlap 2 to 3 inches to make sure that there's no cold joints where that could create, just like a joint of plywood or drywall without being meshed, that could create a hairline crack. So now, once you put that down, we can trowel everything directly into the mix. And once you have covered it in a gray slurry, that's all you need to do. So when troweling your top layer of SpiderLath down into your underlayment material you've created, you're using just a nice medium amount of pressure. You don't want to push so hard that you just squeeze mix up into the actual SpiderLath and diminish the thickness that you're doing. You just want to do a medium to light troweling so that you can just see the grid of gray through the mix. Once you've done that, it's time to just let that cure. Once that's cured, once you can walk on that, you can go ahead and apply your bonding agent and your top coat to be stamped to whatever desired depiction of aesthetically pleasing stone, spray texture, any type of configuration that a customer would want. If you're out there on a hot summer day and you're trying to create your underlayment over a wood deck, sun's beating down on you, you didn't get there early enough to start your job, then you may have to use a little bit of moisture to help work in your SpiderLath because you're creating a much lower viscosity level material, a lot thicker. It doesn't screed really great because you're not using it for stamping. So sometimes you're trying to work that into the nylon mesh and you've overlapped and you've got double areas. So keep yourself a little spray bottle, a little water, just to mist. All you gotta do is mist the area just to create enough slurry to be able to trowel upon it. And that's all you're looking to do, guys. So we've finished our base coat underlayment so that now we can put a top coat of stamp mix stone edge material onto this substrate now, over wood substrate. But what I want to also make clear is when we use SpiderLath, it is a choice whether one uses SpiderLath or metal lath on the first layer attached to the vapor barrier and wood subfloor. And I did give you the attributes and pros and cons between the two earlier in the video. But I also want to make clear that on a secondary coat, it is recommended that one would use SpiderLath material, but it is still a choice between SpiderLath and a non-ammonia coated meshing system, maybe even of a thinner grid, square grid, what I mean, to be able to apply into the surface area. Both would be sufficient, as long as you have at least a 75-pound tensile strength nylon non-ammonia coated material.